Today we're talking about a unique feature with liability in bicycle and pedestrian accidents. I'm Andrew Iacobelli. I'm a personal injury lawyer with Iacobelli Law Firm, and all we do is represent people that are injured in accidents. And a common scenario for injuries is where a cyclist on a bicycle or a pedestrian is struck by a motor vehicle. These accidents happen both in cities and in rural settings, particularly for cyclists. And I want to talk to you about a unique feature in these kind of cases. So ordinarily, to recover money for your losses if you're involved in an accident or injured because of some accident, the party seeking compensation must prove liability. And that simply means they have to prove fault. They need to prove that the other person or company was at fault or negligent, and therefore responsible or liable for paying for the damages, the harms and losses. And that could include things such as income loss, medical expenses, and pain and suffering, or loss of enjoyment of life. So that's the ordinary way cases proceed. And most of these cases are funded or paid by an insurance company. In the case of a pedestrian or cyclist, it's a little different. Ontario has a special provision in the law which actually protects cyclists and pedestrians and gives them a bit of an advantage in claiming for their harms and losses. So for a pedestrian or a cyclist, there is what we refer to as a reverse onus, and that means the other involved vehicle, so the car that struck the cyclist or the car that struck the pedestrian, the operator of that vehicle is presumed under Ontario law to have been negligent. And it really is their burden, the at-fault party's burden or their insurance company's burden, to try to prove that they're not at fault. And that's important because it places the burden on the other side, the at-fault party. And it's a really unique feature in Ontario law, where ordinarily the injured party has to prove everything. They have to prove fault, and they have to prove their losses. Where it's a pedestrian or cyclist, the pedestrian or cyclist that's been injured does not have to prove fault. Okay? Now, that doesn't mean it's automatic that the other side is deemed at fault. They can certainly rebut the presumption, so they can prove that they're not at fault. And so I say that because it's still important not to simply ignore liability or ignore fault parts of the case, but it's an important advantage certainly for pedestrians and cyclists, and it's an advantage that doesn't exist for other kinds of motor vehicle accidents. It's still important to look at liability carefully, because insurance companies will oftentimes try to get evidence early on in pedestrian and cyclist cases to rebut this presumption and somehow try to blame the pedestrian or cyclist for the accident. So you can't let your guard down. It's still important to have a lawyer that will look at all these issues, preserve evidence early, get statements if necessary from witnesses to make sure that your rights are protected. I'm sure you have more questions. If you or a family member has been involved in a pedestrian or cyclist accident in Ontario, feel free to give us a call. That's what we're here for. We're happy to answer your questions. Consultations are free. So feel free to call us anytime. We take calls 24/7. or you can complete our contact form at yakabellilaw.com. Thank you for watching.